I want to talk more about the poetic moment. It's pretty important that uh, we have a clear picture of this and that I do it justice. In the previous video, I talked about the poetic moment as it might occur in real life for someone who is just experiencing the day or the night and experiences an event or a moment in time that triggers something within and signals to the poet, the person, that there is something deeper here. There is something strangely meaningful. There is something that should not be ignored or allowed to pass by without someone thinking about it a little bit, without letting it sink in and maybe influence you as a person. So there are a lot of short poems that we read that do sort of focus around a poetic moment, and sometimes the poetic moment in that physical sense is kinetic. That means that it's movement. It has some action to it. I think Robert Frost has a beautiful poem about crossing a hill and passing a lady and talking about how they pass and how their umbrellas interact. And I suppose his stopping by the woods poem is also kinetic. I mean, at that moment he stopped, but he stopped because he noticed something. He wanted to stop and take in the scenery there of that scene. And so there was a moment where he realized that this is something I need to make time for in my day. And I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if Frost actually really did stop or not. He may have, or he might have been walking and have had that sort of experience and decided that it was best to render it poetically as someone on a horseback ride. I don't know. Maybe that question is easily solved by just doing an online search or doing some reading about Frost and his life, a biography. Maybe it's not so easy to solve. But the point is, sometimes the poetic moment that a poem can be wrapped around is a physical event, and sometimes it's full of movement. Sometimes it's more of a still uh, contemplation, if you will, but still about a physical place or an object one is looking at. I think the poem I just referred to about Frost stopping to look at the woods on a snowy evening might be a mix of the two. He's has motion, they're getting there, but then he stops to ponder. But others are reflections about things that don't seem to have much movement to them, but they're still physical things. Um, well, if you want to see how this happens as well, I'm stuck on Frost for some reason, but he has another short poem called, I believe it's called Range Finding, and it's about a bullet that zips by him, and I believe it topples a flower stem or something, and it's coming from a rifle range down the way. And he ponders this event and just looks at the spider web that is there above that was affected by the bullet. So the spider web becomes an object of contemplation. But Frost put himself in that situation, either growing up and remembering his visual memories as later on, or continually renewing those scenes and sights by walking, by spending time in nature as an older person, as an adult, and aware of the raw material that he was accumulating for the poetry. So there's your poetic moment in terms of how it might operate in the physical world. But there's a counterpart to this, and I still want to call it a poetic moment because it does sometimes occur as a moment of insight, but it is more intellectual in the sense of it's more mental. It's mental, and it just might be an insight that you might have as you reflect or meditate upon life or upon something that has happened to you or something. And it's not necessarily something that you can pinpoint to in terms of, aha, it happened to me literally in a a passage of time, a moment, a couple moments, a minute, an hour, where I had this adventure or this experience, but rather it's all of a sudden just an insight that you have that suggests itself to you as poetic material, an insight about something, and you realize, I really can do something with that. It has the right feel in terms of being the source or the center of a poem. All right. So in the poems that you'll read, the first one, the art of losing, is sort of like this, the one art. Okay. Now remember, titles are very important for poetry for the most part. If it's just a place-holding title like number 32, here's number 33, here's sonnet 34, or sometimes poems in a collection are simply numbered. Or sometimes the editor comes up with a name by using the first line. Obviously at that point, the titles are just functioning as an organizational element, just as a title to refer to the poem by a name. But if the title is crafted and created by the poet, I think it's a much better assumption to make. You don't know for sure, but it's an assumption to make that title was thought through and chosen. So you have this poem called One Art, and you read it and you find out that it's about someone that is beginning to lose things, and they're losing keys, they're losing all sorts of stuff, and the material that they're actually losing starts to scale from outward in terms of size and value, but also from the physical to the more conceptual to the more social. For example, she's lost houses because she talks about losing houses because she's moved from one house to another and she's lost the house. And she talks about losing things like that. You can read the poem and you can see what I'm saying. There's a scaling factor going on in the sense of she can go from the small things that she's losing to the very big things, to losing a country. You lose a country when you move from one country to another. So there's a scaling aspect going on there, but then there's also a crossover aspect. All right, in the sense of she might be talking about losing something. First of all, she might be talking about losing something in her home, but then she begins to talk about losing something in her heart or in her mind. So the act there can cross over to different genre. I want to say genres, but different contexts of living. All right, and the conceptual version of the poetic moment. You got the physical version, you got the conceptual version, which just, it happens up here when you realize there's an imagery or there's an idea or there's a word or there's a phrase or there's a saying or there's something that you could build a poem around that is more of an idea than it is an actual physical thing or a physical moment in time, an actual moment in time. And the things that characterize that is beyond its conceptual, its conceptual nature is the scalability of the thing. The notion that you can talk about it in a small version, just isolated in this one event, but it might scale outward to larger issues. Okay, and that people can once they sense the power of that poetic moment in the poem, can enjoy the poem as it is with the actual language that the poem uses, but they can also sense that they have an experience that also shows up in larger versions. So there's a scalability to that, and scalability is very important because it begins to give your reader a sense that what they are learning is not just one isolated event, but they are learning a principle that they can use to interpret the world meaningfully when they have their own events in different situations and in different versions of this, Um, here's another clear example of scalability. Imagine the disappointment for a child who has been looking forward to, say, visiting an amusement park or going camping, and this trip has been built up for the child. Okay, and the day of the event, the whole thing gets canceled because whatever, it could be weather, it could be car troubles. Um, And, to that child, that might be devastating. Now, to an adult that's had many vacations that might be already tired of camping, it might actually be a blessing in disguise, or if they actually like the event, the thing, they might be, well, we'll just go next month. They're able to understand, right, the big, big picture of it all. But for a child, that could be pretty hard to bear, right? And as far, if we could have some sort of meter that could measure the disappointment and the hurt and the anger and the, I don't know, what goes on in the child for that, might it not hit the same number as the event where, say, a couple that is engaged to be married all of a sudden breaks it off, and whoever does the breaking off is certainly going to not I doubt they would ever view it as a pleasant experience, but they might have already decided in their minds it was the right thing to do, and they have this sort of push behind them to do this. But for the person that it catches by surprise, that might be intensely devastating. You've invested in this relationship, and now it's gone, right? And as an adult, as you might experience that psychological troubling of the waters, if you will, or the trauma meter, or whatever you want to call it, couldn't it really actually be the same level of subjective negativity that the child would feel? Even though we understand that the gravitas of the situation is different. But as far as the felt disappointment, you see what so there's a sense where that can scale. You see what I'm saying? And if you can do a poem right about losing an ice cream cone, you'd be surprised at how those things can work. I mean, you can run across a poem. It's like, how in the world can you make this work with just this, whatever? And it does. Now that's the job of a skilled poet. That's something that goes beyond just recognizing the poetic moment. It goes that moves on to craftsmanship and practice and reading and a better vocabulary than you may have now, and a good sense as how to use it in terms of what your audience is expecting. All of those things can go into the structure that builds itself around that poetic moment. But, well, again, the thing I'm trying to point out here is that the poetic moment has different aspects and facets to it, and some of these moments do occur very physically in a moment in time as you have an experience and you realize, whoa, there's something beautiful here that I can write about, or important that I can write about. But sometimes the poetic moment shows up in your mind as an idea, and it might have percolated there for a while, might have been brewing, if you will, for a while in your head, but there will be a moment when it just comes forth, or sometimes it appears as a flash. I don't know. And, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I recognize this? Well, you have to read poetry, and you have to watch the circle, or the center the poem is moving around. You have to be able to see that. And it's better to see that in the short readable pieces that we have here, as opposed to longer pieces that have a different function. Longer poetry might move off to something else than just what we're trying to deal with here. Okay, so the conceptual moment is very important, and it has this notion of scalability, and it has this notion of crossover value. Okay, where you realize, well, this poem is talking about this scene, but or this situation, but it can cross over and be the heartbeat of the poem can cross over and be applicable to people that are in a different type of situation altogether. right? Well, I guess I wouldn't say altogether, but a different scenario, and yet that lesson or that impact or that vision that you receive, the thing the poem rewards you with, if you give it time and try to work with it, might be the very element that allows you to navigate this whole new scenario better. Okay. So we are used to the crossover, and it happens in a lot of ways. Let me give you two examples. Okay, for let's say that you were involved in high school in some sort of public speaking club. Whether it's a theater or debate or speech, speech competitions, whatever. Maybe right then and there your focus is, well, I want to compete. I want to. Many schools have you know set these things up as competing with other schools in some sort of academic challenge or intellectual meet. And so the districts might be allowing multiple schools to compete, and you want to go and you want a medal or you want to have a ribbon, and so you're really focusing on that, right? But you are learning things like confidence, like stage presence, like being able to listen to yourself talk as you are talking, to be aware of how you sound, of your pace, of the timing, like literally how much time you have. And so then you graduate from high school, you go to college, you graduate from college, you finally find a job, you're on the job, and all of a sudden maybe you're in a leadership capacity and you're actually talking to people. Well, it's pretty easy to see that the skill set you learned in high school for one venue, crosses over and is very valuable for this other venue. It's a crossover. So it's obviously things we deal with a lot in life. We're used to the crossover. We want that because if we can really see it, then somehow that skill set has more value to us. It has more applicability, right? It's not so specific and locked in, to just one specific scenario. And you learn how to master these things. You can use them in many scenarios, and you feel like you really have something useful, that you had a great return of investment in terms of your time and your mental energy, your practice, right? So now we also do crossover a lot in our speech, because anytime we try to make an idea clear by talking about something else as an analogy or a comparison, when we try to compare and contrast things, or when we talk about one thing, X, whatever it is, with the terms that usually are related to another thing, Y, whatever it is, we are able to cross over the essential feel of the communication that we want. So if you're up north, you know what it feels like to be in a snowstorm. If you've ever lived long enough in one of those areas, you've paid your dues, and you know what it feels like to be driving, for example, in a snowstorm. If you're down south or in the west, you might have had similar experiences driving kind of blind, if you will, in a dust storm. I've been in those too. Very freaky. Fog, rain. So this notion of driving blind, right? Obviously, we don't mean that you can't see, because then you wouldn't be driving. But you're driving with very low visibility, and things are you cannot drive the regular way, and it has to do with the situation. The rain, the snow, the dust, whatever. Okay. And when you're used to going 50, 60 miles an hour, and now you're crawling along at 15, and these little red blinking lights of other cars are appearing like ghosts out of the mist, as you pass them, it's a little freaky. It's a little strange, right? But driving blind carries all of that notion with it for people that have been in those experiences. So when you refer to a new experience you're having, say maybe you're trying to navigate a job promotion, or maybe it's your first year in college, or maybe it's just you've been given a task to do that you weren't adequately trained for. Everyone believes in you, but you have no clue what you're doing. And you tell someone, look, I feel like I'm driving blind here. People can understand it. Now, Now, we are so used to doing that, working with analogy, metaphor, simile, all of these things are the same, basically. I mean, there's some technical differences, but the notion is speaking about one thing, maybe this new task that you have in terms of another, driving in a snowstorm, okay? Talking about X in terms of Y, and then uh, hoping, trusting that people who know why, know what this feels like, and they can get that and see what you're saying when you apply it to this other situation here. So that's a crossover we do all the time too, and that crossover is very important in poetry. That's why so many of these poems can be about so many different things, and you realize it's really about something else. It's about something deeper. Your job is to be able to see that and to be able to see it correctly, more or less. There's an element of sort of a ballpark understanding of a poem, and then there's stuff that is so far out there that there's no way the poem could say that. You know what I'm saying? So it's not as if every interpretation goes, but reading poetry is a process of finding the interpretations or interpretation that is really the heartbeat of it, the right one, and what is that trying to tell you about X, your life, you, the human being, whatever, in terms of Y, whatever Y is. A Martian sends a postcard home. I want you to look up that poem eventually and read it. A Martian sends a postcard home. What is that poem really about? Is it just Craig Rain having a fun time with words? Or is he really trying to get you to understand the strangeness of life? Is that the purpose of that poem? And is he doing it with metaphor, with analogy? Okay, so this is the poetic moment that is conceptual. At one point, Craig Rain thought to himself, I wonder what it would be like for a Martian to come and then try to describe all of this, like time and a car and the bathroom and sleeping and dreaming. I wonder how they would do it if they had to, send a postcard back to their home planet. You see that's not something he ran across every day out there in the streets. This is a poetic moment. This is a realization he has that he's like, I can write a poem about that. I can work on that. Now, the actual process of getting that to become a poem might be extended. It might not just happen in a moment, but there is this sense of realization that you have something that's going to work if you want to turn it into a poem. And sometimes it's just this idea, this mental thing. So I want to call that the poetic moment too. So the whole purpose of this video was to add to the last one to say poetic moment. You have a physical version of it. You have a mental or conceptual version of it. And it's good to understand that and to try to see both of those at play with different poems that you're going to read. Thank you for watching.